Today on Power Forward, we're joined by David Dunlap, Vice President of Product Development with top U.S. solar distributor BayWa RE, to recap the lingering issues of 2022, like the WRO and the UFLPA, and then preview what lies ahead in 2023, both in terms of policy and product trends. Hey, David, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Chris, great to be here.
I don't need to tell you this. This has been quite a year in solar. I guess they all are, but this one seems, I don't know, especially crazy, right? The supply chain challenges, new policy. Can you share with us the top things that have impacted residential and commercial solar installers in 2022 from what you've heard and seen?
I'll start with the challenges, the headwinds, if you will. And I was kind of surprised as I was thinking through this and kind of listing them out. But in no particular order, we got the WRO hangover, which became the UFLPA. We've got continued COVID impacts and port shutdowns, the threat of retroactive tariffs, the AD/CVD case with the Oxen petition, global supply shortages on polysilicon, semiconductors, other materials and components, labor constraints, threats of rail strikes, actual trucker and port strikes, severe weather events and catastrophes, inflation, rising interest rates, and now we've got a December 15th decision around the California NEM 3.0, which is expected to pass. A lot of challenges, a lot of bad news. I was trying to think about what some of the tailwinds that we had were. We did actually get a veto of the Florida net metering bill that was passed by Congress, but the governor there shut that down. So we were able to keep the net metering in place in Florida. More and more states have actually adopted some form of renewable policy standards in their energy portfolio. That's exciting and good news for us. And then I think the one big blanket sort of piece of good news that has lots of tendrils, lots of different impacts is, of course, the IRA. The Inflation Reduction Act. And I think kind of the takeaway, despite all of those headwinds and challenges, is we know demand remains strong. We have price parity for solar. Our industry is thriving. BayWa is thriving. And I think as a whole, we're all sort of leaning into and embracing resilience and showing our sort of maturation as an industry.
I'm glad you mentioned kind of all the various parts of the supply chain issues. I just kind of like blanketly say that, but there's so many things that kind of are wrapped up in that. And then, of course, you mentioned the WRO, the UFLPA, and the IRA, the alphabet soup of the solar industry in 2022.
Right.
Let's dig into those a little bit more. How have they specifically impacted the industry this year? The module issue is still lingering over everything. How do we expect them to impact the industry going forward?
Sure. Well, let me start with the WRO and UFLPA, because those are really two sides of the same coin. So the withhold release order was an initial attempt to restrict imports of products from the Hoshine companies, which were suspected or alleged to be committing human rights violations against the Uyghur people in a region of China. That was sort of the first step of a human rights issue that the American government thought was important to take a stand on. And I think what we sort of forget is how that was just a first step. And then in December 2021, Congress passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, which is what the UFLPA alphabet soup piece stands for. That was passed in December of 2021, but it didn't go into effect until June 21st of this year. And that really replaces the WRO. So, again, I think we all have to keep in mind, this is at its core a human rights issue, not an anti-solar policy. But that it does create a very real challenge for us in our industry. And what the Customs Border Protection has been tasked with doing is preventing any importation of products, components, or subcomponents that are believed to have had some form of human rights abuse or forced labor in their supply chain. So the importers actually have to demonstrate or prove the negative, if you will, that their products and the supply chain are free from forced labor. That's a really high bar, a really, really big challenge. Kind of what we have to take away from that is that resiliency and flexibility is going to be key to mitigating this risk. We have to kind of keep up with where CBP is in their sort of attempts to stop product and inspect and demand that compliance documentation. And that may mean that what is available and kind of being imported today won't be tomorrow, right? So we have to kind of keep up with that and be willing to change, be flexible in our kind of product specifications. Obviously, BayWa's here to help with that. We're keeping close tabs on it, and our line card is designed to kind of run through that sort of complexity and offer alternatives so that all the eggs aren't in one basket, if you will. With regard to the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, I think the big great news here is that instead of sticks, we have carrots. We finally get some real meaningful long-term incentives. They're consumer-based incentives. They're incentives for financial asset holders. They're incentives for investors. They're incentives for manufacturers. And all of this, I think, really increases and stabilizes the demand for solar and renewables and ensures investment in the domestic supply chain over time. It's going to take time to build that up, but I think it's got a long enough kind of horizon to it that for the first time, really, that I can remember, we actually have that security, that long-term security that allows for the investment in the U.S. manufacturing that we need.
We've seen the numbers of like the 1,000 shipments of modules that have been detained under the UFLPA and however many gigawatts. And in my mind, I think of that a lot of like as utility scale kind of solar business. And you mentioned kind of BayWa's role in making sure that all of your customers can meet their own demand with, module supply that's available. With those numbers I just mentioned and with the customers that you serve, have there been issues? Or you feel pretty confident that like the demand for residential and commercial is pretty much being able to be met by the module supply that we do have available?
That's a great question. And I think if you had asked me that question 3 months ago, I'd be giving you a different answer than I am today. So I think absolutely there has been disruption to the supply chain, lack of reliable supply. With a number of our vendors that had some detentions and were able to successfully import the product subsequently, the time it took to sort of run the gauntlet and provide that documentation, 6 to 9 months. And in the case of one vendor, it's still ongoing for many of the products that have been detained. So I think that insecurity, that sort of unknown time horizon makes planning a real challenge. And no doubt we've had significant supply challenges. What we're seeing right now here at the end of November is an interesting influx of what I'll call tier 1.5 or tier 2 module supply that are kind of coming in under the radar of CBP. They're not the big names, the big ones that were kind of first on the list to get inspected and detained. They're able to bring in product and they're being able to push it into the channel because the demand was there. They're actually offering it at a lower price than some of those other players. And we believe that the current market demand is being met with adequate supply. That being said, we were way behind all the way up until this point. And so where are we on the demand curve for current installations versus the sales pipeline? That's a little harder to say because really the only measure that we have in our position as the distributor is the sales out that's feeding the install rate. What we know from talking to our customers is that their demand really hasn't slowed too much. There's been a little bit around the change in cost of money and loan prices, but they've got a pretty robust sales pipeline, but they've still been limited as to exactly how many jobs they can install every week or every month. And that run rate has been relatively consistent against an inconsistent supply chain. But I think we're getting closer back, at least in the DG market, the distributed part of the market. I think we're getting to a little bit more balance.
Legislation has a huge influence on the industry, but I do want to switch up a little bit and talk about products. This year, in 2022, what's maybe stood out to you? What in solar and storage technology do you think has maybe helped the industry?
I don't really feel like we had a whole lot of like what I would call groundbreaking new product. But I think there's kind of two or three things that rise to the top for what we've seen this year. One was Enphase releasing the IQ8 series and kind of showing us what the future state of inverter technology can be, kind of highlighting the fact that it can be grid forming, grid agnostic, the potential for daylight backup and bidirectionality in inverters. I think they really beat everyone else to the punch with those things. And we're kind of thinking about, well, IQ8 is just X number of dollars more expensive than the previous one, and I don't want to pay that. And it just makes it more challenging. But if we really dig under the hood and look at what that technology is, there's some significant value adds and new sort of unlocking new potentials there that maybe is still being a little underappreciated. On the commercial side, I think we're just seeing a push towards much larger common building blocks on the inverter. So it used to be that it was kind of rare that we would sell 100 kW inverters. Now those are kind of very commonplace, 100, 125, 150. And a lot of the companies are looking at, releasing 250, 350 kilowatt size inverters. So big changes in the building blocks. And of course, that keeps up with the fact that the modules, the power density going up, and just building bigger and bigger systems. And then lastly, on the storage, I think we really did see at RE Plus the response to the market demand for kind of a single functional storage add-on, a single point of contact, accountability, warranty, and sort of performance wrap in a storage product. It's less about a battery that goes with someone else's inverter and somebody else's rooftop rapid shutdown kind of thing. That's much more common in many other countries, but here in the US, the market really is wanting a single kind of AC coupled and PV agnostic solution. And I think Tesla really set the bar here for our industry in the US. And I think the release of new products that really fit that same use case of whatever you're doing on the PV side, if you want to add storage now or in the future, it's one thing, right? It's one bundled solution, one price, one commissioning, and it just kind of sits on top of whatever else is there.
On that last one, I was definitely waiting for the industry kind of to get to that point, because I think it's good for homeowners, and I think it's good for installers to be able to just simplify and kind of streamline on a particular brand or a product family. It's just kind of easier, and it makes, I think, the sale a little bit simpler. I don't know. I just think it makes a lot of sense.
I agree, all of that. And I think it is a challenge at the kitchen table to kind of design your entire energy future when you're just starting and thinking about contemplating the solar side. So being able to do it in chunks, right? Maybe come back for an add-on a year later. And of course, that's a great fit with the policy around the IRA and the offering of standalone storage incentives. So really perfect timing, I think, for that solution set.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And so now kind of lead me to what comes next. This is Power Forward. So let's think ahead past 2022. What do you see on the horizon trend-wise in 2023? I guess, or what are you most excited for that you think is going to be coming up?
There's a couple of things in the module space that I think we would have seen this year if not for all of these headwinds and the challenges around COVID and the supply chain for the last 3 years. But we are starting to get kind of the leading roadmap information from the suppliers about changes in N-type wafers and TOPCon technology. And basically, without getting into any of the details of it, what this leads to in combination with larger wafers and cell size is just a greater energy density. So within the same however many square feet or square meters of the panel, you can pack in more watts at a higher efficiency. I think the days of the standard P-type mono PERC are kind of sunsetting, or they're at their peak. And I think we're going to see over the course of 2023, many of the major brands releasing new higher efficiency, higher watt class, and larger format wafers and cells in their modules. And I think that's also going to change kind of the overall frame size. We went from what anybody who's been in solar for more than 6 or 8 years thinks of as a standard 60 cell residential module. They started getting bigger, then they got longer, then they added another row, and now it's 66. And then, well, why not put a 72 cell on a house? I think going to the larger form factor cell is going to allow them to kind of go back down in form factor. So we're seeing more 54 cell half cut, or even in the case of Trina, they've got a 40 cell third cut. So it's back to 120, but it's, a different form factor. And it's just, I think it's the sweet spot for what works on residential roofs, particularly in the Northeast, where, the roof is very angled and pitched. And I think the trend towards larger and larger kind of doesn't work in all cases in the resi space. Now, the utility loves that. And I think the trend towards larger and larger modules continues in the utility and large C&I. We're definitely going to be seeing 600 watt and up. And we're seeing bifaciality in the utility and commercial space almost exclusively. Many of the major manufacturers don't even offer monofacial for their commercial mods anymore. And I think we're going to start seeing that same bifaciality come into the resi, whether we're advertising it or selling on the basis of that backside gain. The cells themselves are capable of bifacial. Overall in the industry, I think the way I would characterize what I think we're going to start seeing next year is that we're at the forefront of a shift towards an electrification industry rather than just a solar plant installation industry. Introducing EV chargers, energy monitoring and management more as a robust thing, load control, storage and backup. I think we're going to start seeing more holistic energy management platforms and bidirectional inverters. And I think we're going to see a connection between solar and kind of the Internet of Things, the smart connected home environment. And I think this is really a space for us all to actively participate in, but also to understand what the opportunities might be for our businesses.
Definitely with you on that. And it kind of connects to what you just said previously, about the manufacturers kind of solidifying their product ecosystem on the storage side, and kind of, I think that kind of consolidation of products and services in the electrification of the home is just going to kind of keep happening. So yeah, definitely something to watch out for in our audience for sure. And let's end back on the I don't know what if I want to call it a downer, but back on the policy side of things. What are you hearing? What's going to impact the solar industry, maybe positively and possibly negatively, in the legislative space next year?
Yeah, well, my crystal ball around policy is not very great, nor would I expect it to be super clear. But I think the highlights we should all be kind of keeping an eye on and paying attention to is the anti-dumping circumventing duties, the Oxen petition, if you will. The broader issue there is the kind of tax stick against less expensive imports. And until the U.S. manufacturing can really compete head to head with Asian manufacturing, I think that imbalance and that challenge for an economic parity is still going to be there. So regardless of what happens specifically around the open Oxen case that's here now, I think the AD/CVD kind of conversation continues. And I don't think that's going to go away unless and until we really can up our game on the U.S. manufacturing side. UFLPA, we talked about that a bit. Unfortunately, I think my prediction here is that it gets worse long before it gets better, because according to the law, the act, Customs Border Protection is mandated to ban the import of these products. And the way in which they sort of decide what products are non-compliant is murky at best. And they can't ban everything all at once, or our economy would collapse, right? Because like I mentioned before, this isn't just about solar. This is anti-tomatoes and clothing and fibers, and there's so many different impacts of this that it's just not realistic for them to stop everything 100%, but they do have to work their way through and enact the ban across different industries and across different manufacturers and imports over time. So my caution to any listeners that are on the manufacturing side is, if you haven't already figured out your documentation paperwork, get it figured out, because your day will come and you need to be able to produce that. On the installer side, again, I think it's just important that we understand that safe today doesn't mean safe indefinitely, unless and until you've actually proven and you have full documentation. And we're starting to see a few partners that are capable of doing that. The Trina imports that BayWa is selling today are fully inspected and documented through UFLPA. That's an exciting development, right? And I think Trina has bragging rights for the first ones to be able to do that. We're obviously all watching the December 15th decision around California NEM 3.0. If that passes, we can expect there to be a change in the economic benefit of the net metering. So a 6 or 7 year payback immediately becomes maybe more like a 10-year payback. That's going to have an impact. But I think the potential for adding storage on and maybe capturing more revenue, and so the number of just standalone solar installs might go down, but the attachment rate of storage might go up. I think it's also possible that some installers will say, I don't want to do storage, I just want to sell solar. So maybe California is not my core market, I'm going to look at other states. There's still a lot of opportunity there. So we may see some shifting market dynamics around that. Yeah, I think it's sort of an inevitable maturing of the market. And it's disruptive in the near term. But I can imagine a future where we don't need necessarily the same kind of economic incentives or benefits that we needed 15 years ago with the costs of every produced kilowatt on the renewable side, and that parity with conventional energy forms. I think IEE 1547 codes come into their new implementation under the 2020 adoption. So in January of 2023, we're going to start seeing some new requirements around inverters. And I think some of the manufacturers are saying, I'm not going to update my aging platforms. I'm going to release my already planned new platforms with compliance to these codes. This is obviously a state by state and utility by utility jurisdiction kind of an issue, but I think we're going to see sunsetting of old product lines, new product lines coming up that are fully compliant. We've seen this before, California Rule 21, smart grid requirements, other things. It's just, that's part of the roller coaster ride, but I think that's coming up on us fairly quickly. On the positive side, I think the IRA, we're going to see obviously being able to leverage the consumer ITC incentives first, so that predictable 30% homeowner rebate for the PV systems, and on January 1st they can access the 30% rebate on the storage. Once the IRS publishes guidance about the domestic content requirements for, on the finance side, the third-party ownership PPAs, people are going to quickly figure out how to access that fund and leverage that in the lease models and PPAs. That'll take a little longer because, of course, IRS hasn't released that guidance yet, what that domestic content rule is, nor do we know who will be compliant. So there's going to be some kind of quick activity and kind of juggling of who qualifies and what products kind of are at the forefront of that. We've been getting a lot of questions about that since the IRA passed, and unfortunately we don't have any answers yet. And then lastly, I think kind of touched on it a little bit, but the cost of money. The IRA has quite a bit of available funding there for the third-party ownership models. And so I think in addition to what we're seeing today with an increase in loan prices kind of going up faster than what the overall market and inflation pressure is, we've already started to see a preference for loan to drop and shifting over to lease. And I think as those lease models become more viable, they're able to tap into some of that other IRA funding. I think we're going to see another increase. It's been a long time since lease was the preferred financial model. The beginning of this year, I think we were at something like an 80-20 loan to lease market, and wouldn't be surprised if within a year we're back to more like a 50-50.
Never a dull moment in the solar industry. Lots to pay attention to, but lots of very cool, interesting stuff, and a lot of opportunities for solar installers out there, residential, commercial, utility scale, to really change the game going forward. And just thanks for taking the time to walk us through what to be paying attention to in 2023.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, obviously, sort of a general shout out to all of our installer base. Please use us as a resource. We're here to help. We're here to have these conversations, engage not just your primary point of contact, the sales rep, but ask for some of senior leadership to come in. And I would extend this to, not just to BayWa, but obviously, I want to plug our company and our opportunity, but, we're here to help. We're here to serve. And there is a lot of complexity. But hopefully we can help have these conversations and help folks navigate the complexity. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, your brains and insight aren't contained just within these bi-monthly Power Forward videos. They can be accessed, year round by interested installers. So thanks for the reminder on that, for sure.